If you had told 18-year-old me that I would be standing on this stage, or any stage, introducing Ani DiFranco, I would have thrown a few choice expletives of disbelief your way. Teenager me was a broken and sad thing, and Ani spoke directly to her. Apologies, in my imagination, in my imaginary friendship with her, we're on a first name basis, so. And apparently she spoke to a lot of you guys too. Whether it was drugs, abortion, privilege, confusion about liking girls and boys, abuse, Ani seemed to know exactly which feelings and which lessons to whisper and which to scream. A voice I needed then and a voice we need possibly even more today. Ani DiFranco is right? As you all know, Ani DiFranco is a Grammy Award-winning musical artist and feminist icon, recognized for her poetry and songwriting, as well as for her social activism and political engagement. She created her independent label, Righteous Babe Records, in 1990, and recently released her 20th studio album, Binary. Ani DiFranco's No Walls and the Recurring Dream is a candid, passionate, and often very funny coming-of-age story defined by Ani's fierce independence. From being an emancipated minor sleeping in a bus station to releasing her first album at the age of 18, to consciously rejecting the mainstream recording industry and creating her own label. DiFranco's stories of perseverance and hard work show how she overcame personal and societal obstacles in order to remain true to herself and to her creative process. Tonight, Ani will be in conversation with Laura Anki, Senior Director of NPR Music. Prior to joining NPR, she was the Dean and Chair of the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Humanities Center at Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, Ohio, and she served as Vice President of Education and Public Programming at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum from 2008 to 2015. Okay, we should get to the main event. Please join me in warmly welcoming Ani DiFranco and Lauren Anki.
That's a rousing start.
Yeah, thanks you guys. Thanks for coming out. Okay, well, so I've done 2 of these things now, and in my infinite expertise, I think it maybe feels best to start with a little reading, just an invocation, so I'll do that, if that's all right. I didn't really know what to read, though, so I thought I'd just begin at the beginning. Read the introduction, and then we can rewrite this shit as we go, Lauren. Okay. Introducing. I remember being on stage once in a tight little dress, the bottom of which kept riding up my thighs all the way to my crotch as I moved around and sang. Why was it doing this? My face growing hotter and hotter as I tried to hide behind my guitar. I remember walking out in New York City to get some kind of queer award and getting booed for not being queer enough before I even reached the podium. I remember seeing something warpy and reflective from stage. It was in Amsterdam, and saying on the mic, "What the fuck is that?" Only to walk over and see it was a young woman in the audience living with such severe palsy that she had to lie back in a special wheelchair with an elaborate series of mirrors in which to see the world beyond her knees. In other words, I've had many experiences of being on stage and wanting to die or disappear. I've had many experiences of being trapped in spotlights and time suddenly slowing way down, the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears, taking over from some distant sonic background in which angry words are being flung at me from a deep darkness. Somehow this was worse. It was not just crying, but sobbing. It was Carnegie Hall, spring of 2002, and the sobbing from the third balcony was getting louder and louder until it began echoing around the room. Plus, she was not even the only one crying. A moment of paralyzing trepidation came over me, and I heard my voice falter and begin to move into a distant, slow motion. It was the culmination of so many recent moments of paralyzing trepidation, having been in Manhattan on 9/11 months earlier, and having breathed in the acrid blue smoke of the towers, having hit the road mere weeks afterwards when everyone else was canceling their tours and staying home behind closed shutters. I traveled around a country in a state of emergency. I played to half-empty houses that took months to slowly fill up again. I felt all the while a great pressure to lift up the small audiences that were brave enough to come out, a pressure to make sense of it all, to make hope happen. I was confronted nightly with an impossible task. How am I supposed to make a whole show filled with all kinds of songs about all kinds of things when there's just one big thing pressing down on us all? How could I possibly sing or talk about anything else other than the all-encompassing panic in the air or the ominous march to war? And even if I could magically suddenly make a whole show around this one looming thing, what the hell would I say? It was a challenging time to be a folk singer, at least if you take your job seriously. The message that it was unpatriotic to criticize the president and his just go shopping while we bomb the shit out of him rhetoric was everywhere, even from people and sources where you wouldn't expect it. It was weird watching what fear did to people. Unnerving numbers fell into lockstep. I tried to make myself into a lightning rod for critical thinking and accountability. I studied, I made notes, I got my facts straight. I stayed up debating and discussing late into the night with the most politically astute of my friends. I consulted trusted sources like Noam Chomsky, The Nation, for guidance in sorting through the mainstream media quagmire. This is frickin' long, Ani. Okay. You guys still here? Okay, sorry. Note to self, 1 page is enough. Okay. I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. On each stage, I unfolded a different permutation of a poem that came to be called Self-Evident. I attempted to engage people directly with this poem in real time, but now here I was laying a poem about 9/11 down on the very people who had shouldered the brunt of the violence, the brunt of the loss. It was Carnegie Hall. It was only 7 months later. And I was alone on stage when the question of how can I possibly talk about anything but this right now suddenly wheeled around and became how dare you talk about this right now? It was too late. I was trapped again. The spotlight was on me and there was no time to rethink my decision. I heard my distant voice finish reciting the poem. I think it may have even sung a few more songs. Then I was back in a dressing room full of smelly lilies and roses, and there were pats on the back, and congratulations, you just played Carnegie Hall, hugs. Time inexplicably kept going. I will never know what is the right balance in art between painful truths and painful silences. There is no right balance to be known. It is a question to be asked of every moment, and its answer pertains only to that moment and no other. It is the spontaneous deal we strike with others, the conversation or lack thereof. Having played my part every which way, I'm not even sure what I'd recommend. I just know that we need to be willing to make mistakes. I know we need to allow for our differences. I know we need to forgive each other. I've managed to transcend my own trepidation many times, and I've lifted whole groups of people up with me, and of course, I've also failed miserably. I've caught glimpses along the way of something very powerful, and I'm not sure that I can tell you what it is, but if you give me a chance, maybe whatever it is will show itself. Which brings me back to that night in the mid-90s. I was quite young at the time when that god-awful dress kept riding up my ass. It took me about 4 songs before I decided that the only thing to do was to take the dress off. There was no fixing of the problem, only the conquering of fear. Get ready. The truth is too valuable to put safety first. Get set. No amount of exposure is unbearable unless you let it be. Go. If you get caught with your pants down, take them off. Hi, Lauren.
Hey, Ani.
You're still here, too.
Such a beautiful opening. And, you know, it's interesting that you open the book with that moment on stage of fear, because it felt to me watching your career and also in the book that you love to perform, that being on a stage was a kind of home and a connection. Was it also always a place of fear, or does that just kind of come at these hot moments?
Yeah, a place of mortal fear is what it was almost entirely for a long time. I was, my fright in the beginning led to all kinds of self-deprecation. It was painful, I'm sure, for an audience. And but I was a desperate human being, so I had to overcome the fear. I needed to connect. So I just kept powering through it. Yeah, got easier.
Because the connecting was maybe just more powerful than the fear, right? There had to be some payoff for you, right? As a performer.
Yes. I'm one of them typical people who ends up on stage. There's a need that is stronger than the fear.
So why the book, and why the book now?
Right. Because I have kids. And driving around playing in bars is hard on them. It's hard on my fella holding down the fort. And I, like is typical of me, I just kept going until stuff started to unravel at home. And then I went, oh, I have to shift gears. So this was my oblique strategy to stay home. And I sat down in my kitchen for 2 years and did this pretty much instead of songs and playing and touring.
It's such a really fascinating mix of types of writing. I mean, you've got some straight narrative in there that, you know, as this happened and about particular shows, and especially like the road stories in here are amazing. They're just great. But then there'll be kind of philosophical reflections and then some poetry and song lyrics. Can you talk a little bit about how you put together the styles and the pieces?
Yeah, I was trying to write a memoir, and I kept veering off into just blowing hot air. You know, I couldn't help myself. It just kept happening, and then it got. I found, you know, when I was talking about my ideas and what I think about and what I care about, and I got really excited, and I was like this. And when I was talking about what happened, I was like, you know? So there got to be a lot of those the idea sharing bits, and then I thought, I have to find the balance. I could feel, looking back on when I was working on what I had, that, you know, I could feel the momentum stop when somebody says, sit down, let me tell you, you know, for 2 hours what I think about, you know, and shit is, it's like, can we get back to stuff happening? So I invited a lot of people into the process, like, did I lose you? You know, did I go too far?
Sometimes it felt to me like it would be the conversation you'd have after the show. You know, like it felt to me when you would go into things about politics isn't the right word. It really is about sort of oppression, patriarchy, our bodies, those kinds of things. It felt like the kind of conversation you in the morning, after a show or back on the road. So as a reader, I felt like there was a really great rhythm between those two modes of writing. So you nailed it, Sounds like it was a lot of work.
Good. Yeah, I didn't lose you. Yeah. I mean, it's those conversations I have with myself, and I think that's what really excites me is to share what I've learned, or that I don't feel like I came up with anything. I come across things in this world that I think are beautiful and useful, and I just want to pass them out, or share, break bread.
You do a lot of kind of excavation into your own family history and the pathways of your mother and father and your brother. Was there some discovery in that work, writing about it? Were those stories that were kind of new for you to talk about?
I would say that the overall effect or discovery for me was a deeper gratitude. My starting with my family life, it was a little fraught, and so I had these sort of abbreviated, or cliff notes of memories. How we distill things, jerk, awesome, and so I realized after sitting there, going gingerly back in to the house of memory, and that in itself was such a hard process, remembering. I mean, who remembers anything? Nobody. So I didn't think I could do it. But you just slowly oh, there's that, and then underneath that is another thing, and you kind of hypnotize yourself. And when I came out of it, I felt more grateful. I felt like, wow, you've been spinning this shit dark, Ani. Meanwhile, that's just not the whole story.
In the book, you talk about reading, it seems the first kind of reading experience you talk about as really kind of blowing your mind was at the New School, right? And poetry, and Lucille Clifton's important there. When you circle back at the end about your mother and reading, was reading something that was powerful for you really young?
Yeah, my mom kind of gave me that, and I'm so grateful because books have changed my life so many times over. And anybody who comes to my shows knows I will not hesitate to go on for a half an hour about a book to an audience. They're like, okay. There's a little bit of meditation in here about my love-hate relationship with the written word. Books really have set me free, and the written word has helped me to know myself and the world so much, and yet, without going too far into the written word to me, I suspect is also connected with the force of patriarchy. Just in a sentence, just the written word is a linear left brain, right hand from our masculine nature. It is our masculine side, a medium that is born of our left brain, and so often that can lead us so far astray from the living, breathing experience of now, which is the providence of the right brain and sort of our feminine side that we all possess. So I fear the written word, and I mourn the effects of this endless story that has overtaken anything outside of the story. But I also love and am so grateful to the written word. So I don't know. There it is.
It's pretty great to dive into the written word.
Yeah,
with
use
that feeling about it.
what is it that Audre Lorde would say?
Yeah, use the
well,
tools
she
of
would
it.
say the master's tools will never
That's
dismantle the master's house, actually. But Audrey, if I
Yes.
may, I'm going to try.
Audrey's a hero, for sure. You have if I might read to you for a second, if you don't mind. You write so beautifully about other musicians and people that have been important to you. And you said, I think my one shining gift in life has been to know who my teachers are and to follow them around looking for ways to be at their service. There's a lot of interesting teachers in this book, but I wondered if you might talk a little bit about Pete Seeger, who is such a...
Yeah,
exactly.
His 100th birthday just passed.
Was he a teacher for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we didn't hang out a lot, but when we did, it was one teaching moment after another. It was just his presence, It was that kind of teaching that doesn't need words. He had this spirit, we were talking about Mr. Rogers before we came out. Pete had that shit. It was just, He was so open. He just somehow communicated, I love you, I respect you, I am here with you. And he brought everybody into that space. I had experiences with him at, concerts where, egos are at play, and things are happening not always on a high level. And then in walks Pete and just all of that shit dissolves around him,
It seems like you connected with a lot of older artists, pretty young in your career on the folk scene. Is that something you did kind of consciously? Like, did you see them as kind of mentors? Not the right word, but as
not consciously, but and I guess it became apparent when I was writing, not just older artists, the older men.
Yeah.
I have so many old men in my life that I have just. I don't know, and maybe it's completely circumstantial, these people that I intersected with who, across many layers of whatever, uniform and culture or things, we're just like, oh yeah, you and me, comrades, so, yeah, I mean, Pete and Utah, and, I mean, in the beginning, Michael, Sekou and Maceo, and I don't know, I love my old men.
Yeah. Well, it's the relationships seem so creative and powerful and kind of leveling in a way, the way you depict them.
Yeah, each of those men I just mentioned, my relationship with each of them was so dynamic, such a one of mutual vibage, just...
Pete opens up the story of how we think about folk music, right? And right away from the beginning of your career, it was a different kind of folk. It was certainly a less polite folk music than people were maybe talking about what folk meant by that time. I think you kind of resuscitated a punkier kind of folk music, right? Which is what it all is about. Where do you, was that a stressful kind of community to enter, the folk community? Did that have that style
if I think
conflict?
back to when I was 20 and whatever, breaking on this, every community was a stressful community to enter,
Yeah.
I felt other, most places, And yeah, there was a lot, we would dub them the folk fascists,
right.
that had, there's a way that it is done and you're not it, and you scare me.
Yeah.
And so there was some resistance, but then there was Pete, and there was Utah, and there was Peter Yarrow, and there was Odetta, and there were people who were just like, oh, come here, So I felt very, very welcome by plenty, enough.
And Nora Guthrie's in that story
Nora,
too, right?
yeah.
Did you discover Woody kind of through Nora?
I think, much earlier, This Land Is Your Land. We all discover Woody, though we don't know it, when we're children in America now. And I think he was a subliminal presence in my very earliest music making. Michael Meldrum, my first mentor in Buffalo, he brought to me, sort of the folk canon that I didn't even understand, and those were songs that I learned to play real early on. So it's definitely the bedrock of where I, come from musically.
I was thinking about Woody's writing a lot when I read the book, and some of your road stories, and there was some real overlap in kind of vision of the world and the work that the singer has to do.
Yeah. I think it's, that's kind of the gig of the folk singer, and probably not many other brand of traveling, performing artist and musician, but especially the folk singer who tends to incorporate oral history and found stories. And, like my friend Utah was very strongly of that tradition where you come into town the day before a gig, and you walk around and you talk to people and you learn the stories and you learn where you are and the history, and you bring that into your show, and you become a part of a community as you interact with it, and you carry away from it that history, and you sow those stories as you go. And so, I think just my nature, is amenable to travel, to adventure, and my love of America was something I was born into. Both my parents are immigrants, and they loved America, and I think just being able to travel around America and get to know it and see for myself was thrilling. It was like learning the person you love.
It took me a while. Like I'm maybe halfway through the book, and I'm thinking, you're on all these trips, right? And you're really young, and you're out on the road. And I'm like, this doesn't feel scary. You wrote about it in such a way that it didn't feel scary, when it must have been at times, but maybe not at that age. But you seemed capable of just taking that kind of risk of movement. And the book has that energy as a read, you know?
Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I was not scared. We all get scared, but that was not how I felt. Looking back on what I wrote at 48, I realized, whoa, that's a lot about self-defense. That's a lot about survival. That's a lot of... And I re-recorded like 15 tunes from the 90s to songs that came up in the book, and I looked at those early songs and I was like, whoa, I hadn't really thought about my journey in that way, but it's a lot of what it's like to be prey.
I was thinking about that with the song Gratitude, and that, the right to not be prey. And we need those songs.
Yeah. It's funny because, of course, any book is a memoir is such a radical distillation, and there's 10 times as many stories that aren't in there, but and I was thinking if I was it could have been a litany of bad scenes, and but that wouldn't have been true either, true to the whole, So I tried to include just enough for those who were never young women, who might be reading this to understand that constant presence, but also the decision to not be overwhelmed by it and to be happy and unafraid.
Which you always conveyed on stage, I think. There was that, and still will be, the joyousness of being out there. I was also really struck that it's written in a time before the internet. So in some ways, too, that feeling weaves in your view of America, right? You're out there, and you're trying to connect with your friend, and maybe they're going to show up today, maybe tomorrow. We can't text each other. But, we couldn't, right? You just, right?
Anybody old enough? Right? How did we survive?
Is there a payphone here we could maybe use? But I was also thinking about it in terms of kind of privacy and risk-taking and having everything you do be in public. I mean, you were doing some pretty wild things, but they weren't being seen by millions of people. That's not really a question.
No, but that's a deep subject, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I really do. I really wonder what this girl's journey would have been in the age of the internet. I mean, even just, the little choices of it's hot in here, fuck it, I'm taking my shirt off and playing this show, and all the other women in the audience, yeah, fuck it, ah. That's a different decision to make now, as is every moment that we live and are supposed to not make a mistake in, or every moment that we are going to offer up to eternal scrutiny and judgment. Those are just heavier decisions. Even the insignificant moments now have endless significance. So, yeah, all I can say is Goddess bless the young and the brave today and how they will navigate making mistakes, which is what it takes to evolve.
And, for young women, about whatever their choices are, about sexuality, about their bodies, it's just so on display now. And, you certainly put up with your share of public criticism and about, all kinds of choices that you made, and I'm sure got letters and things like that, but it's at a scale, I mean, I'm sure that felt just as, right, but it's at a scale now that I would find sort of terrifying.
Yeah, I think I always found it terrifying. I don't know. Early on, the shaving the hair off, and I can't even breathe in this arena of predator and prey and sexual object and the attention, that sort of attention that actually makes me feel erased, not seen, So, it's like, okay, goodbye to that attention. I didn't know how to be me in that context, so I kind of was inventing my own context. And
you did that for sure.
Yeah. Way to be, sexy on stage. I remember the first time I met Janine Garofalo, what were we talking about? She was something, she totally called me out for being my version of sexy on stage, because, yeah, I'm not a sex object. And she was like, but look at you. You're obviously coming on to someone. And I was like, okay. All right.
Is that wrong? Can I do that, right?
But, I of course relate to that, if a woman wants to fucking play it to the nines, please don't let me sit here and make you think that I think that's bad, because of course we all want to be beautiful and have our sexuality be free. And so, yeah, I found my way, and for a moment I fooled myself into thinking I've dropped the game of see and be seen, but I needed a different way that felt more comfortable to me.
One of the interesting parts of your journey musically, and my brain went there because I was thinking about the different kinds of conventions of performance, right? So I wouldn't typically associate you as somebody who would have worked with Maceo Parker or with Ivan Neville, with funk music and the way that funk and soul became so important to you. And that's also then a different kind of bodily performance, right? Of clothing, of maybe more rigid kinds of gender. Did you think about the politics around gender and sex when you began to kind of embrace that music? Was that in the air around that?
No, I just, so I think my journey came from folk and roots, and I was blessed very early on by getting invited to folk festivals, which, especially across Canada, a lot of them are like world music festivals, roots music from every which where. So I had influences, I had friends, I had people around me from all over the world early on playing all kinds of music. And so through the road of the folk circuit and these festivals, I encountered a lot of African guitarists, and immediately we were like, there is something there was a kindredness that we found in each other's sort of circular patterned groove thing, and I think from African groove music, I got into African American groove music and, just kind of had a whole other musical, spiritual awakening into a whole other land later on in my own musical journey in my 20s, and through this love, my love was so acute. I somehow, looked down one day and there was balls hanging between my legs, and I just called up Maceo Parker. I was like, he's the the coolest, James Brown's right-hand man for 30 years, just this deeply funky, awesome, joyful performer. And I thought, and he's got to have a phone number, so. And I asked him to go on tour with me, and for some reason he said yes. And there was never any, Maceo, his family is Jehovah's Witness, and he is a Jehovah's Witness. And one time I invited him to play on a song of mine that's about reproductive freedom. But I didn't want to dupe him or swindle him. So beforehand I told him what the song was about. And he said, so it's about a woman making her own decisions. And I said, yeah. And he said, it's cool. And he came and he blew some badass horn lines over it. And so all of those differences dissolve so magically with music. That's what I love about music so much, is we can find each other across any measure of difference.
And in New Orleans, where you've been for a while. That's another place where you've kind of connected to those beats. I love the stories in the book about the Rebirth Brass Band, which is one of my favorites. But being on the road with Rebirth and horns, is that a sound you'd really like to stay with for a while?
Oh, yeah. The New Orleans brass band tradition is so deep, so deep. And now I've been living in New Orleans for 15 years, and I live right in the Marigny, which is next to the French Quarter, and, kids with trombones walk by all the time, just blowing their, it's just so, so cool. And, so there I was again. I'm going on a summer tour, and I have a little budget. I've got a little audience, so, hey, Rebirth, want to come? And they did. It was hilarious. They show up at the budget rent-a-car like the day of that they had to start driving, and they didn't have a van, so they got 2 Lincoln Town cars. And 9 black men driving in 2 Lincoln Town cars across Idaho and Nevada. And, they got pulled over a few times, for driving on the right side of the road or something, and dropped my name, which I thought was hilarious. That's how you know you're in a desperate situation.
Because you were quite the target.
Yeah, I was not like a police fave, not playing the ball,
I wanted to ask you a business question because your newest mixtape is on Spotify, and we can hear you on Spotify. And you have been so forward-thinking about controlling your music, and with Regis Babe, and throughout your career. Kind of how do you? What's the status of streaming music for you as a musician? Is that how are you making your peace with that?
Yeah, well, I'm lucky that I have enough. I have more than enough. So I have witnessed, though, a lot of friends who, those 5 album sales, the difference between the 5 and the 0 is an important difference, and so it's an interesting time. The music is free, should be free idea, and it's hard for people to navigate, but I think it's just always been hard for people to be artists in this world and still feed themselves. So anyway, my only take is I just know that when I'm on the right path, the universe holds me. And it hasn't let me starve, it hasn't let me fall. And so I just think that it will work out if you're doing what you meant to do, and people will respond to that.
Whether it's, buying cassettes after the show way back when, right?
Yeah, and I mean, my audience, bless them, bless you, has always brought so much consciousness to the table, too. And, I've been peripherally aware of people policing each other. Like, don't, buy it from her. It matters, think about it. And, but it's a conversation that we all have to have, I think, about art and its value. My father, not only... He was an engineer and a math guy, but he loved artists. He just revered artists, writers, musicians, dancers, and so he taught me to value it, to hold it very, very high, actually. He just showed he was a person who held artists above the rest of, in what they give to society. So, I don't know. We, of course, have to find a way to support the artists in this world, but it's a changing landscape, and we're just trying to find that way, I guess.
Yeah, right. I mean, and the path that you describe in the book of even just trying to figure out a business model, right? And it's a bunch of people who don't have any experience with it, and at the scale of it as it unfolds, and how you were navigating that, which, I'm sure is hard. It's probably the last thing you wanted to be thinking about, right? You want to be thinking about songwriting, but you take it on.
Yeah, right. It was a lot of energy and not my favorite direction. So that is definitely a part of the choice of staying independent is having to put in that energy to, not just the luxury of what you love to do, but a whole lot of other shit around it.
We were, NPR Music launched a series a couple of years ago called Turning the Tables, where we have tried to put the history of women in music at the center of popular music, and not just as a one-off, but as a kind of ongoing conversation. And the first year was a list of top 150 albums by women of the kind of the album era, early 60s forward. And Little Plastic Castle came in at number 25, so we're really excited about that. As we've gone on in this year, and all of the critics and writers and NPR on-air folks and member station folks are women who are selecting and also doing all the writing. But we also have constant debates about whether or not, as feminists, we even want to make these lists, right? But the lists are such a powerful lever on the internet to engage people in the kind of history of the music. So I hope that you're happy to be on such a list. But we, we have long conversations. Should we rank? Right?
Yeah,
should we rank? Should people have a number or not?
That's legit. That is totally legit. And again, there's nothing wrong with this sort of masculine hierarchy of individuals. There really isn't. It's part of our nature. It's part of our how we survive, how we evolve. It's part of us. But when it is just so the only thing for so long, it's like, what about that sort of lateral web of relationship? And, what if we knocked down that tower and just dealt with it more this way? And I've always had this huge aversion to ranking and lists, and I think just inherently, rubbed up against that feminist nature in me. I was doing a press day in New York the other day, and I ran into Nick Hornby. You know Nick Hornby? High Fidelity, and he's a great writer, and a great maker of lists, and a list guy, right? And he had been an appreciator of my work for so long and supported what I was doing from afar. And when he was making High Fidelity, the movie, he actually called my peeps and asked if I would play the musician chick in the movie. I know. Why didn't I do that? First of all, I was busy. I had shows to do. I had shows of my songs to sing. And second of all, I hated that list thing. I hate it. I have more of a sense of humor now. And it was just.
We've been talking about but how do we talk about greatness when it comes to, some of the great women artists of the 20th century, trying to talk about the scale, the greatness of somebody like Serena Williams, right? How do we talk about greatest of all time? Is there some value to doing that for women? So we're all in a knot about it.
Yeah, right.
What should we do?
I know, and especially that feminist knot of she's the best female XYZ. Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Wow,
I think I got my answer. We want to make sure we've got lots of time for questions from this awesome audience of your fans. So I was supposed to tell you before I said that, sorry, to please line up at the mics for questions.
Yeah, all
but
right.
everybody got right to it.
All right. Early bird.
Is it on? Hi. I wanted to know, first of all, thank you. Your rants that you went on about the alphabet versus the goddess were revolutionary and blew my mind, so I appreciate all of them. I wanted to know if you would share more about what you said about the gratitude that you found while writing and realizing that you were painting your past bleak or black. If you were, what was the process that you went through to come to that realization, and how has it been different since? That's...
I guess I don't know. I just wrote the book. I try not to overthink when I'm creating, and one thing I do a lot of that I'm really practiced in is pretending I'm alone. You know, when I'm writing, it's the only way. It's the only way I can do it. So I know that I wasn't trying to make sure I didn't piss off mom or make sure I was just trying to be true and pretend I'm alone, and I'm completely free. And then when I stepped back from it, that's when I just went, that's right. Everybody who hurt you also gave you a lot. So don't forget that.
Thank you, Ani. When you say your name, I learned today that we naturally smile in saying it. So I was taking photos of people up here, and I was like, say Ani. I'd like to publicly thank Sarah and the first row of women who 2 hours ago, I didn't know I was going to be able to be here. And thanks to her and this group before you came, it was amazing. And I thought you might appreciate knowing that. I have a favor to ask of you. I was at your show at Wolf Trap in the early 2000s, and I believe you played with Seeger at the time. There is a song, even with the amazing staff you have at Righteous Babe Records, where I've been to church and a religious experience here at Temple. I do not know what the name of the song is, and it has bothered me for years, and I've spent endless hours on the internet trying to figure it out. I can't sing. Well, to carry a tune is not my deal, but I sing like Ethel Merman, so if I just give you a bracket, I feel like you'll be able to answer this question for me. So please bear with me. But this is like my opportunity to have this answer. I can't explain it. It'll be all right. I can with your authenticity. Does this sound like something? I have no idea what it was, and it was wonderful, and I love it.
Oh, I love that you
just
just went there. I'm sorry, I can't tell you where we are right now.
This nameless song is in my heart and in my mind that many more years later, so thank you.
Write it. You should write it out. Finish it.
Will you sing it?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
You know, everything's funny if you sing it like Ethel Merman.
Yeah.
Like, try to do We Want the Funk.
Yeah,
we want the funk. Right? It always works.
Hi, Ani. It's such a pleasure to see you. I've loved you since I was 15, since I heard you on FUV with Little Plastic Castle. So it's such an honor to be here. I would say of all of your songs, Brief Bus Stop is probably the most meaningful to me, particularly the line, my life may not be something special, but it's never been lived before. It's something I've carried with me through all the time that I've been going on my own journey, and I've always wondered, who was that woman? Who is that woman at that brief bus stop?
Okay, you guys gotta bring it into the 21st century here.
I'm sorry.
That was Ethel Merman.
Oh, okay. No. But just what you captured with her, and that though she was just a person, that there was some value in everyone has stayed with me. So thank you for that.
That's you, that's me, that's us.
Yeah.
So
probably. Thank you for that.
Yeah, sweet.
Hello.
Hey.
Perhaps like many people here, I remember the exact moment when I first heard one of your songs when I was 12, and it was Cradle and All on an independent radio station. in Colorado, and pre-internet times, like we were talking before, I was just praying the radio announcer would tell me who this was. And they luckily did, and the rest is history for me. And you really instilled in me a feeling in my 12-year-old self to serve a higher purpose in my life. And my calling is to represent the U.S. abroad. I know you've performed a lot abroad, and I was wondering, when you think of representing the country you love, the person you love, how do you bring that into your performances abroad when you're speaking to overseas audiences?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess the traveler that I am, I am often put in a position which maybe is akin to yours, which is represent, America when I show up somewhere. And then, of course, it's explain this. But for me, I always find it very awkward to be put in that position, or it's not, because when I'm traveling, I'm wanting to learn. My version of traveling is, who are you? Who are you? How do you do it here? And I just thrill to people's different ways, and I think it's such a gift of traveling that you learn the beauty of different ways. I think if everybody in America could leave it, could travel around and really have opportunities to get off on how different people and cultures could be, maybe we could all come back home and look around our own country and say, yay, yay for all of our difference.
Thank you.
Hi. Piggybacking on that, I do remember the first Ani song I ever heard. It was Untouchable Face. My mother was appalled, and I will never be able to thank you enough for that moment. That's not my question. A couple of years ago, I saw you in Baltimore when they did the whole brand new Baltimore waterfront, and you had lots of opinions on it, and it made me laugh. But you told this story about your daughter. You were having one of those fights that's not a fight with your husband. And you asked your daughter, you're like, what are you guys doing over there? And she was like, Mommy, we're over here being happy. And it really resonated for me as a parent of small children who are walking around with most of my bad attitude. And I wanted to know what being a mother taught you about when you deploy your ferocity and when you sort of pull back and just sit and be happy.
Yeah, I just have to say yes to that question. Yes to whatever. I mean, yeah. That hit me. It scared the shit out of me when I first became a mom and sort of realized, oh, right, it doesn't matter what I say to you. It matters how I feel. It matters how I deeply feel about things. That's what you're learning from me. And then you check in with yourself, right? And is this what I want to teach? How to feel like this? I so can relate to that struggle. I have been putting my ass on the hot seat for 12 years now. My daughter is 12. To invest less in my own outrage, to learn from her that how much good shit is all around us right now, to open myself back up to that. That is a mother's journey. I'm with you.
Thank you.
Hi, and thank you both, and thank you, Ani. I've been a fan for a long time, and very oddly enough, my question is actually very much related to the previous one. I've just finished writing a book about my mom, so I spent the last year and a half thinking a lot about motherhood and identity. So I guess I'm sort of wondering, and you've talked about this in interviews previously, but I've been thinking a lot about how, women becoming mothers, how they evolve their sense of self and their identity and sort of maintain an identity, and how that shifts, post bringing humans into the world.
Yeah. Identity shift, big time, huh? And I feel, I mean, one thing that I learned, a woman's work that I got turned on to when I was pregnant is Ina May Gaskin, Ina May. And she wrote Spiritual Midwifery and, other revelating books to me, because I had never thought about just first the act of birthing, pregnancy, birthing. And she made me realize what made so much sense, a truth that resonated so deeply in me, whereas this is, I think 80% of women will give birth in their life, but even those that don't, of course, have this interplay with creation, through their reproductive system. And so there is this dance with life and death and life and death and life and death. But just when you become a mother, it's supposed to be this moment when you realize you can do the impossible, when you realize that you're stronger than you ever thought you were, when you realize that your relationship with other women is as profound and important as how you are stacking up within the patriarchy, and this moment is pulled out from under so many women now in this modern medical hospitalized birth. And birth becomes not a moment when a woman is suddenly put in the position of needing to be saved or needing to be, and this essential right is taken away from so many of inherently knowing their own strength. I remember just the first time I gave birth at home, it took me 3 days of labor because I was resisting. It hurt. It hurt, and I thought I would die. And even just the length of time that it took me and feeling like I couldn't do it for that long and feeling it turn into a nightmare and then hearing the words, "I think we might need to go to the hospital." Those were the magic words, by the way. That debilitated my sense of I can do anything. My sense of self was crippled for a long time. So I feel like I can relate to so many other women's experiences, just even in my way of having, instead of this moment when all your self-doubt gets slapped away, having it become overwhelming to you. And then, you're asked then to carry forth this being into the world. And you as parents, as any parent, you need a lot of belief in yourself and your ability to do the impossible, to raise a kid, So yeah, I don't know. I have found the challenge at every step, invaluable, excruciating and boring and intolerable and invaluable, because meeting those challenges every day has definitely enhanced my sense of self and what is possible. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Okay.
We can take 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you. Hi. So I'm an immigrant and refugee health nurse, and so I find myself working with these refugee and immigrant families and often working with the kids who are basically first-generation Americans. And so as a child of immigrants, I'm working with kids that are trying to find the balance between going to high school and then coming home and sharing a bedroom with 5 siblings and that sort of thing. I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom as a child of immigrants that I can pass along about how it will get better or how to kind of find that balance.
Oh boy, you guys give me a lot of credit. I don't know. I mean, gee whiz. I think you are there and you are with those kids, and I bet you're very open to their hearts and their journeys and their struggles. So I'm sure you could tell me more than I could tell you, what they need and what, and a way to be with them, but, I think just seeing a kid, coming back to the Mr. Rogers spirit, just seeing the humanity of a kid, that when you do that, I'm sure you've done a great thing for them.
Speaking of a little one.
My very similar questions to mine were asked, but I just want to give my turn to
Okay.
Hi, Ani.
Hi.
I'm Brianne, and this is Olivia, and we would very much like to know if you have a favorite dance move.
Best question.
You guys got a favorite dance move? Should we end the show by doing it together? Should we all do it? No? Okay. Fair enough. All right. I'm on the hot seat here. I don't know.
We like the mashed potato.
The mashed potatoes? Yeah. Remember the solid gold? Anybody? That was always a good one. What was that about?
In an alternative universe, you were a solid gold dancer, right?
Thank you. Yeah, most of my favorite dance moves revolve around a guitar. It's all like, how can a monkey jump around and not drop a guitar? So I probably can't show you now.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for coming out this evening.
Oh, thank you. Congratulations. This is a great book.
Thank you, Laura.